Hi everyone, this is Megan Phillips, and this is part 2 of our Racism Professional Development. We are going to talk about racism and its relationship to education and its relationship to curriculum today. So hopefully everyone was able to watch this video. It's called Fighting Racism in Schools. It's from 2017, and there were 4 Native American youth who shared their experiences attending school from kindergarten to 12th grade, and they talked about everything that they had to go through, and they talked about the stereotypes and how they really disagreed with the curriculum that was being presented to them. And I felt like it was incredibly powerful hearing them share their stories and knowing that their voices weren't always heard or represented within the curriculum. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on the curriculum and our educational system. So before we get started, let's pause and talk. How do you encounter racism within your own school, within your own teaching, and within your curriculum? What does it look like? So this is our main slide for today. Let me move this up. So racism within the educational system. We have segregation, school funding, and unequal learning opportunities. You'll notice that I put an arrow because I really feel like one thing leads to the next with this. So we know that within our educational system, it's undeniable, right? Racism, it didn't end when schools became desegregated. There's actually a continued presence of racism within our schools. We talked about in part 1 about the segregated housing market and how that leads to our segregated schools. When we have segregated schools and a segregated housing market, that affects school funding for the most part. When we have schools receiving money from the property taxes, that's directly related to the value of the home, and that allows for unequal distribution of funds. So, which really creates there to be schools with a lot of money and then schools with not a lot of money. And we know those schools with not a lot of money in poorer areas, we know that's where youth of color are disproportionately represented, right? That's where they're living, where they're renting. There's a lower cost of homes, and therefore not a lot of funds. So that allows for unequal learning opportunities. Now, low achievement is directly related to our higher poverty schools, and some reasons why we have unequal learning opportunities are when we think about our teachers. Teachers have a huge effect on their students. And in some schools, they have to, because of a teacher shortage, they are allowing less qualified teachers. You know, they have lower requirements, maybe not as much experience. There's a huge disparity among the quality of teachers within our schools with more money and then schools that are not having that much money. Unequal learning opportunities. We also have fewer resources, limited, less challenging curriculum. We have fewer educational resources as well. All of these things, how good our teachers are, how challenging your curriculum is, all of this impacts student achievement. So we know student achievement, that also is going to affect graduation rates, college acceptance rates. Now, even if we don't have school funding money coming from the property taxes from different homes and for different schools, schools can still have raised money privately. And we see that here in New Hanover County all the time. And when parents or the PTA, when they're raising money, they could have different types of music class, more technology, travel abroad opportunity, more funds for field trips, larger libraries. All of this is expanding the inequalities. And then when funding is equal, which is rare, there's still other forms of this. It's going to be with physical structure, again, teachers, and rigor is always a big thing. And remember that when we're talking about poorer schools and money, this goes hand in hand with race. And we covered that a lot in our last PowerPoint. So now let's go ahead and look at racism within the curriculum. So we know that we live in a white-dominated society. That is completely reflected within our school system and the content that we're teaching. When we look at our history books, when we look at the teachers, when we think about the stories that are being told, the literature, everything that's represented within our classroom environment really is about dominant society and really maintaining that dominance. There is a lot of distortion. There's a lot of omission within the content that is taught. Another issue with racism within our content is when we look at testing, even the types of questions and who's creating those tests, who those tests are serving. It's not representative of our entire student population. It is not serving all of our students. Also, when we look at our curriculum, and this is really speaking from an elementary standpoint, there's hardly any information about racism within our curriculum. So if we're not talking about it, we're really not able to think critically about it. And it's presented as like a thing of the past, something that's not thriving within our educational system and within society today. So that's a big problem, the fact that it's just non-existent within our curriculum, really. Or if it is, it's really looking at it in isolated acts. So there's a few different types of racism within the content, the actual content itself, the testing, and we know testing has a huge impact on content, unfortunately. We're more likely to teach things that might be on the test, especially with the mounting pressures that go along with our students doing well in test. Let's see. And then we have the hidden curriculum, which is perhaps one of the most important parts of all of this. This is really what's not taught. So it's unofficial, it's not explicitly taught, it's our unintended curriculum, and that's our norms, values, beliefs, and that has tremendous influence on our students. So this also has to do with teacher bias, which is our next topic. But yeah, how are you interacting with your students? How are their voices welcome? Is everyone represented within this? If you are talking about scientists, are you just including white men? Because if that's what you're teaching, but it also says a lot who you're not teaching, who you're not covering, who's not represented, and that speaks volumes. Thinking about racism within curriculum, we also have teacher bias, and research. So research has found teachers are so important. Right? They're so important on student achievement, and students who think that their teachers believe in them are more successful. So research has also found that a high percentage of teachers believe that their content or their classes may be too difficult for their Asian students or Black students and their Latino students. So teacher perception, teacher bias is having a huge impact on their students. And when we think about teacher perception, there's actually the greatest gap among teachers and Black students in the perception of content being too difficult. So when we're underestimating our students, that just has detrimental effects. So I want you to stop and think about your curriculum. Think about what you're going to go teach right now when we're done with this PD. What are you teaching? Who does it serve? Are you dismantling oppression, or are you kind of allowing for this cycle to continue? Really not questioning, not thinking about anything that's going on? Are you going to go do a lesson about Thanksgiving and the first Thanksgiving about this gentle feast of thankfulness? Or, are you really going to challenge it and kind of say the truth? Okay, and let's go. Oh, and just one more thing with our teacher bias as well. Teachers are overwhelmingly white, and our urban schools, are mostly made up of students of color. So there's a big gap here, and kind of like a detachment. So some people call this, they say that there's cultural incongruencies. So when things are not the same ethnic, social, racial, linguistic backgrounds, when people are not of the same ethnics, that's really something that we need to be looking at, and seems like not enough attention is paid to that. When we think about the teacher prep that we've gone through, we have our traditional curriculum, our methods course, our foundations, but nothing really culturally pluralistic or focusing on our global society. All that's kind of a missing piece, and probably one of the most important pieces of our teaching. Also, so we are realizing how important our teachers are and looking at teacher bias. Now think about how in kindergarten, first grade, if schools are participating in tracking, and to have no background and to have a completely background that's different than your students, and then to be setting them on academic tracks that they're going to probably be in until high school, thinking about the huge impact that has, not only on their schooling, but really for the rest of their lives. Now let's go ahead and take another look at this chart, which I shared last time. Let me move this over. And remember, we have our Black students who are represented in the blue, and then our Hispanic students where their numbers are represented in the yellow. And this just shows how they are disproportionately represented within discipline, and what we just talked about within AP classes. Also missing from this chart, which I wish that they included, was that both of these groups are overly represented within special education as well. So we can kind of look at this a little more critically now. Remember, we have our state, our percentage, and we're just seeing this overrepresentation again and again and again in all areas. So I want us to pause and talk. Why does this chart look like this? How did this happen? What do you think? Okay, now we are going to end with some critical questions. Is it your job as an educator to teach about racism? What can we do about racism that is embedded within our curriculums and our school systems? Now, we know this is true. We know racism is not really a part of our curriculum right now, the subject of racism, but we know that it's also embedded within our curriculum and our school systems. Now look at your individual classroom. Let's start small, right? Are you producing racial inequality, or are you dismantling it? Here are my